troubles in one part of the world can and do have a spillover effect on other parts of the world.
These days,
So it's a volatile situation. But I think on terror, I think the world will have to unite much more strongly. Much more strongly. You can have differences. There can be territorial disputes.
Right.
But you cannot have a situation where you say, I or somebody funded by me or somebody inspired by me can use terror
to achieve objectives.
political objectives.
Right.
No, you can. If you have a military conflict, you are in military conflict. It's a different thing. But you will be in trouble for two reasons. That then you are unraveling the very foundations of the civilized world.
Hello and welcome to Strat News Global. Israel and Hamas conflict is of course making headlines for the past 3 weeks. But what really is the position of the global community on terrorism is something that we haven't discussed enough on at least on our channel. And I thought Mr. Hardeep Puri, who was of course India's Petroleum and Urban Housing and Urban Development Minister, is someone who has dealt with the terrorism part, the counter-terrorism part of it in the UN, in his previous avatar as the Foreign Service Officer for India and the UN representative there, permanent representative in the UN. And I thought today I'll talk to him about that aspect of international relations and global politics rather than petroleum or urban housing. So thank you very much for your time, Minister Puri. And let me straight away come to this question. In your previous avatar and in your previous specialization, you've dealt with the issue of terrorism as also the UN, India's permanent representative to the UN. What is the Counter-Terrorism Committee and what is the issue of the Resolution 1373?
No. First of all, the issue of terror has been around for a long time.
Exactly.
What is terror? Terror is an instrument that you use in order to strike terror or to achieve objectives which your organized military strength may not be able to do. That has been the thinking behind people who resort to using terror as an instrument.
Right.
Terror has been used as an instrument by small groups of people, by organized groups of people, and in some cases by a state also.
Sure.
That is when you refer to state terrorism.
Right.
I had the, I would say, in some respects, the privilege, but also it was quite an experience of coming face to face with issues relating to terrorism when I was relatively young Foreign Service officer. I was posted in Colombo. I was only a first secretary. I was having put in about 9-10 years of service, 10-11 years of service. And the Sri Lankan ethnic crisis had an ethnic dimension, but clearly had issues of terrorism which the Sri Lankan state had to confront. And clearly there was an Indian dimension to it, because they sought sanctuary in parts of South India. There's a large Tamil population in India and elsewhere from which the Sri Lankan militant groups or terrorist groups, depending on what language you want to use,
Right.
Which drew strength. You could go on arguing about the extent to which the state was involved or the government was involved.
Yes.
There are things which can be said in. So, a large population in India felt that the Tamils had been reduced to second-class citizens.
Right.
And they had the benefit of English education in Sri Lanka, or in Ceylon as it was called earlier. By virtue of the fact that they had the benefit of English education, they had a passport to jobs. They were only a minority community, and that led to resentment, etc. Well, it was one thing to deal with those issues relating to minority rights through a political or a constitutional process. It's quite another if somebody takes up arms.
Yeah.
So when the LTT was formed and it gained strength, we were invited to become the peacemakers. I was the first secretary dealing with political work. I made contacts with the militant groups in Jaffna, with their representatives, etc. And I was ultimately the person designated to fly out Velupillai Prabhakaran, the LTT leader, from his hideout in Jaffna to India, and then he came for a meeting with the Prime Minister and the India-Sri Lanka peace agreement, which was a very valiant attempt to forge peace in a country divided by earth inexisting.
Exactly.
But, 2 or 3 things haven't changed.
I remember you as the points person actually between the LTT and the government.
Well, I was, to the extent that the concerned agencies had maybe, let's say, a level of mistrust had developed between them and so on. I mean, but I was then the official, I was the face,
Yes.
the political officer dealing with them.
Right.
Look, no organized state anywhere in the world, democratically elected or otherwise, is going to allow terror to be used as an instrument of policy. No one will allow it, no matter what.
For
And
any
the-
political, for any political objective.
For any, and the jurisprudence on that, if I may use the word, is very clear.
Absolutely.
No act of terror can be justified just because you say, I have a good cause. You can use violence in a calibrated way against military targets. But by terror, if you target innocent women and children, as was done on 7th October, there is no justification. Now, the apologists for the other side will say, no, but they are in occupation of a territory. That's all not acceptable. If that were to happen, and you can, somebody gets up and says, well, you can have a 9/11, you can have a 26/11, you can have a 7th October will now enter the lexicon. You will have a situation where anybody gets up with a few resources, you can just, introduce mayhem into a society.
True.
So that is the conventional and that is the dominant wisdom. We attempted a comprehensive,
Counter-terrorism.
comprehensive,
Declaration.
a convention on terrorism in the UN.
Right.
It ran aground because they said one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Again, I think that's a very, very misplaced debate. The 1373 committee, which you
Right.
you see, what happened, Nitin, is that unless you have to face what terrorism is, you don't know what it is. We were always at the receiving end of cross-border terrorism,
Exactly.
coming from where.
Yes.
But the West, for the first time, faced it at its own doorstep. Suddenly they grew up, and this is a very serious matter. You must, under the Security Council, set up a 1373 committee. And they thought it was so important that for the initial years, the chairmanship of the committee was only held by the P5.
Right.
And then, of course, along came India, and we were elected to the committee.
You were there in 2011.
11 and 12.
Yeah,
I chaired the committee in 2011 and 12.
12, yes.
When we were on the Security Council. After me, another one of our colleagues chaired it for half the time.
Right.
Okay. Now, I have 2 submissions to make to you. When there is a terrorist outfit, countries will proscribe it or they will say that it's banned, etc. Hamas is banned by a large number of countries in the West, etc. The UN has other systems also. They have a 1267 committee, which is the Al-Qaeda
Yes.
and the other group,
Allied group.
sanctioning committee.
Right.
But what has happened just now is that the world, at least so we thought, there was an element of restraint, that acts of terror would be committed by people very carefully, calibrated, designed to those things, because there are differences and they will do it. But this one was in a class apart.
Sure.
It was designed to invite maximum response.
Yeah.
Because the game that they are playing is that there will be a disproportionate response. That disproportionate response will lead to a number of things, and then half the world or most of the world they thought will be pitted against Israel.
Right.
It's a totally wrong calculation. Because whilst you may be in favor of a cause X or a group Y, nobody is going to accept that the entire foundations of a free world are going to be destroyed like this.
Exactly.
What does a terrorist do? A terrorist takes away the most fundamental right of all, the right to life.
Life. Yeah.
And I would like to believe that certainly the world has become a much more dangerous place.
It is.
But this is just the beginning of a churning that will have to take place.
Especially in that part of the world.
That, but in other parts of the world, because there are a lot of people who are holding on to strongly held views who will say that, no, this is right, that is wrong, and I'm right, you are wrong. But the point is, that's not how you're going to conduct yourself. Sure. And you risk the dangers of a much bigger conflagration, exacerbating the violence, drawing other players into it. Whether it will happen or not will depend on the wisdom and maturity of the people involved. I'm always an optimist, and I think people will be able to see what the downside is.
Right.
Because if we've got so much of weaponry there, and you've got,
funding
also there, you also have, a little more loose non-proliferation structure around. And I believe that this could spiral out of control. I don't think it will.
Right.
I mean, affecting the supply lines on energy is only a small part of it, but the very existential question. I mean, if you look at the history of the First World War and Second World War. So, I think I personally believe that the Hamas outfit is bitten off more than they can chew. Earlier, other groups were taking advantage of this. When I was accredited to the Court of St. James, I used to tell my friends in the MCO that, look, I don't see you are seeing the emerging pattern. He said, no, we are an open society,
right,
and people come here. I said, they take advantage of your democratic society, the freedoms that you offer. Right. But at the end of the day, if you have to maintain the structure of your society and its stability and integrity, you will have to be careful. I think a lot of people are suddenly realizing that they've gone too far.
Right.
And troubles in one part of the world can and do have a spillover effect on other parts of the world.
These days,
so it's a volatile situation. But I think on terror, I think the world will have to unite much more strongly. Much more strongly. You can have differences. There can be territorial disputes.
Right.
But you cannot have a situation where you say, I or somebody funded by me or somebody inspired by me can use terror
to achieve
political objectives.
Right.
Now, you can, if you have a military conflict, you are in military conflict, it's a different thing. But you will be in trouble for two reasons, that then you are unraveling the very foundations of the civilized world.
Absolutely.
How civilized it is, you and I can argue about.
No.
But this is happening all the more because the multilateral system which was established after 1945, that is in disarray.
So I was going to come to that, because since you worked in the UN so extensively and at the highest levels, what is the UN's role now? Can it intervene effectively, or it's now just a bystander?
No, first of all, what is the UN? Let's get our definition right. There are three UNs out there, as I know. One is a UN which is a combination of the 193 member states.
Right.
Then there is a UN out there which is a secretariat funded by the member states, but sometimes does things on its own.
Right.
And the third UN out there is the civil society and NGOs, etc., which in many ways is a very powerful one. But collectively, the so-called UN is in disarray also. Why? UN had primarily, I put everything aside, two functions. One is peace and security, and the other is development. And you can say human rights and so on.
Right.
On the peace and security part, you have a paralyzed Security Council. It's been paralyzed since the time we were on the council, 2011 and 12.
Correct.
It has been paralyzed because permanent members of the Security Council, the 5 of them, are in disagreement. Correct. As they are on the Middle East issues today, as they were on the Russia-Ukraine thing. So what is happening? The one agency which is designated with the authority to make a determination on whether there exists a threat to peace and security, the Security Council.
Right.
And if it makes the determination that there is a threat, it is the only agency which can authorize the use of force or all means necessary.
Sure.
Now tell me, you see all these conflicts around the world. Which of them went to the Security Council to seek approval? They don't bother.
No.
So if you can wage war without bothering about the Security Council, and the Security Council can't do anything about it, that speaks volumes about what kind of effectiveness the multilateral system post-45 anchored in the UN has. And I'm afraid unless you are able to correct that, it will. Things, somebody, a wise man said, you don't construct new structures till there's a crisis.
Absolutely.
The UN itself was born out of a crisis.
Right.
There was a Second World War. It was still going on when people got together to look at the post-war structure and to see what can be done.
Exactly. So let's wait whether that restructuring will happen or not. But just one question before we move on to your core areas of responsibility now. India's stand has been very calibrated. India is looking at it in a very comprehensive way. I think the world will realize that what India is doing is the right.
Absolutely. No. There is a certain clarity. There is a absolutely a policy clarity which is anchored in the real world. I mean, the PM statements at the time of the Russia-Ukraine war bear this out.
Correct.
The PM statement on the Israeli Hamas issue after the 7th October are absolutely clear. And they're being cited all over the world.
Right.
I mean, the G20 declaration talks about the PM stand. This is a time for peace, not for war. Equally, I mean, no one, and I'm surprised how some people fudged it. No one can doubt what the PM said. Ki, look, this is a naked terror attack, and which doesn't change your view on the need for a two-nation solution, because there can be no other solution.
Right.
But you see, the Hamas's philosophy is that we want to see Israel obliterated.
It cannot.
And that is as absurd as saying that the whole Palestinians can be obliterated.
Sure.
So, I mean, you can be against Hamas, but you can't be against the Palestinian people equally. So, a lot of super intelligent people are now doing that. But, those are people who have not been part of the government or have not had the responsibility to run a government.
Right.
Today, you are in a very interesting phase. I think as wiser counsels prevail, there will be people who will say that a state must be held to a higher level of responsibility than a non-state actor.
Right.
Non-state actor being
The Hamas.
or anyone. And then human rights debate was also peculiar. When I was ambassador to the UN, I met the leader of the British delegation then, and she said, non-state actors don't commit human rights violations. I said, where have you got this from?
Right.
That is traditional political philosophy taught in British university, that the state is all powerful, and the state, by virtue of being all powerful, is repressive. It
Commits atrocities.
It commits atrocities against helpless individuals or non-state actors.
Right.
But they forgot that helpless individual ultimately became a non-state actor, and the non-state actor became which group do you want me to name? I mean, Al-Shabaab. It became Al-Qaeda, and it had it had a global reach with global financing. But they realized that only when the West got attacked.
Exactly.
I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I can't feel the pain from reading a book.
Right.
Till I'm affected by it, I see what the damage it does to my social fabric, killing our innocent people.
Right.
Now nobody cites that human rights violations are only committed by the state. I mean, some nutcase professors and universities, the kind of atrocities which are being committed,
Yes.
and violations of human rights.
Exactly.
The terrorist takes away the most fundamental right to life. So that is the change in thinking that you can see.
So in a way, India is really, leading that middle path and the just path, if I may say.
Absolutely.
That is there. But let me move away from that and come to, you just came back from Mozambique. And if I read the details correctly, India is doing one of the largest investments abroad.
We have a large investment. We have a $9 billion investment in a gas facility in Cabo Delgado. And 3 of our companies have put in, I think, a total of $9 billion. And there was a security problem there.
Right.
And as a result of which the operator, Total Energies of France, had to invoke a force majeure.
Right.
Now that force majeure, I think, is going to be lifted shortly. Then about, 35-36 months after that, we should see gas production. It's a very big field. It's the gas there has less impurity than most of the other gases in terms of carbon dioxide. And I think if all goes well and this facility starts producing gas in the next 3 years or so, which is what we are expecting, all the contracts have been awarded, etc. It will be a major plus for our energy security also.
Which is good to know. It also diversifies our energy supplies.
No, you see, the energy, I must tell you, as far as gas is concerned, currently I think the global production should be about 480 million metric tons per annum. But with the new fields coming up, this will go up to 900 or so million metric tons per annum. And I think we have been diversifying.
Right.
We used to import from 27 countries crude oil. We've now importing from 39. I mean, we never bought much energy from the US. We're buying $20 billion from Russia. Before the February 22 event, our imports were 0.2%. We were buying, I think, 1.4 million barrels a day from them. It had gone up, then came down. Look, India, large population, a fast-growing economy, energy growth and consumption is 3 times the global average. So India will need energy.
Right.
And I think good policy would mean, as so far we've succeeded, we have to ensure availability, we have to ensure affordability, and also sustainability. I mean, in the last, say, 2 years, energy prices in India's neighborhood have gone up by 70-80%. In the Western developed world, industrialized world, they've gone up by 30-40%. India is the only country in the world where crude oil, petrol prices have come down by 5%.
True.
And diesel prices by 0.2%. Why? Because the Honorable Prime Minister took bold decisions on 2 occasions, November 2021 and May 2022, reduced the government cess, central government cess, excise duty on this thing. And the BJP ruled states also brought their VAT thing down.
Yeah.
So you have this situation that one part of the world where India, where you worked also, in the north, West Bengal, their petrol retails 11 rupees 80 paise more expensive per litre than, say, a BJP state. So I think we've navigated so far, but in the coming time we have to be careful, because the situation so far, I think energy prices are by and large within a band or under control.
Right.
But they could spiral out of control.
So, and that's the last question that I have, that we started discussion on the Israel-Hamas and the terror part of it. If this conflict prolongs or gets stretched, will this affect energy prices, or will this affect energy supplies? Do you think, apprehend that?
No, as I said, I chose my words carefully. The adjectives I used, I hope maturity prevails and you have a situation in which people will not allow the supply lines to get affected.
Right.
And I think also, the state of Israel has got a major challenge on its hand.
Yes.
And they have to give a response to that.
Exactly.
But so far I find that they're being calibrated and reasonably cautious, etc. And it's the process went. But if it spirals out of control or there's a involvement from others, etc., it could. So you have to be very careful. But so far, as I said, fingers crossed, we've navigated it so far. We hope to navigate it in the remaining time also.
I'm sure with your experience and with the kind of support you have in the government, I think that should not be a problem. But thank you very much for your time. I know you are short of time right now, but we must have one more conversation.
We will have.
On urban housing and urban development.
Whatever you like. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.